The Lee Jae Myung administration's agenda for the next 5 years has been unveiled just in time for the public appointment ceremony scheduled for Friday evening here in Seoul to officially usher in his term at the top office. With more on Press Perspective today. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective for this Thursday, August 14th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. The Presidential Policy Planning Team has shared the administration's 5-year agenda for national governance and broader diplomacy, while preparations are underway for tomorrow's appointment ceremony to formally mark President Lee Jae Myung's term at the top office. For more on this, I have Thomas Maresca with American news agency UPI here in the studio. Thomas, welcome back.
Thanks, great to be here.
I also have Ruy Valdes with Spanish news agency EFE Spain. Ruy, it's great to have you here.
Glad to be here, Sonny.
Thomas, we will start with you. So as I mentioned, the Presidential Policy Planning Committee back on Wednesday disclosed President Lee Jae Myung's agenda for the next 5 years. Could you walk us through the main tasks and your takeaways?
Yes, so as you mentioned, this State Affairs Planning Committee presented 123 policy tasks in a kind of a grand 5-year plan. And this was, basically the kind of a de facto transition team, which, as we know, Lee Jae Myung did not have a transition period between being elected and taking office. So this is basically what that would be. It's still kind of a blueprint. I don't think it's finalized in all of the details, but, I think the big picture takeaway is this idea of, what he has talked a lot during his campaign and in the early days of his presidency is a kind of a people-centered, a popular sovereignty. He calls it a politics that unite the people. And they identified as their top task constitutional reform, which, Lee Jae Myung talked about on the campaign trail. And this is basically, the idea of taking decentralizing some of the power, taking some of the power from the top, from the presidential office and some other, places in the government. I mean, again, we don't know exactly the details. I mean, when Lee Jae Myung was campaigning, he talked about wanting to change the presidential term from 1 5-year term to 2 4-year terms, maybe to make you sort of have to be accountable in the midst of your presidency if you want to get reelected. This is something that has obviously been going on for a while. There's previous administrations have also wanted to do constitutional reform, and there's, I think long been this sense of inadequate checks on presidential power. So this is something that's been in the offing, but there's also just kind of other ways that transferring concentrated power from authorities. Another big one they mentioned is prosecutorial reform. Kind of getting rid of the Supreme Prosecutor's Office and splitting it into 2 sides, one that does investigations and one that does the prosecutions. And this is also something that particularly the Liberal or Democratic Party has been trying to get accomplished for a long time. I mean, Moon Jae-in tried doing it, then sort of Yoon, that caused a clash with Yoon, then Yoon sort of tried to reverse course on some of this. So this has been cycling around for a while. He's also talked about just bringing the economy back 3%, targeting 3% growth rate. Mentioned South Korea being a top 3 in artificial intelligence and fostering in future industries like biotech, sustainable energy. Mentioned reclaiming wartime operational control for the South Korean troops, to take that operational control from the U.S. forces by the end of his term, which has also been a topic that has, been in the works for a long time. And another just thing, balancing regional development. This has also been a huge issue in South Korea, where everything is so Seoul concentrated, the economy and life. So trying to spread some development and revitalize other regional areas. So those are some of the big ones. My takeaway, I think certainly some of these topics have been floating around for quite a while, and it's sort of a wish list that other presidents have had too. I think right now he's in it. I think certainly something along the lines of, say, constitutional reform and changing the presidential powers. I mean, I think if ever there's a time that could sort of have some traction, it would be now. I mean, a lot of what Lee Jae Myung is doing is kind of building on the reaction to what happened, you know, in the administration prior to his. So I think there's certainly a sense of, look what happens when, you know, we give too much power to the executive. So I think there's probably, you know, this could be the sort of moment for something like that. I mean, prosecutorial reform has been a very hot button controversial issue, and even already within the National Assembly, there's been some bills, you know, from the Democratic side that have been very, you know, pushed back against by the conservatives. I think that will be a fight. You know, I think in general, you know, he still has a bit of this honeymoon period. Obviously, this is a wish list. You know, the realities of how much can you get done. You know, I mean, there will be political opposition. I think popularly, there's support for kind of just more of this, you know, he has taken this pragmatic but sort of people-focused approach in the early days of his administration. So I think there will be, you know, there is popular support for that, but, you know, we'll have to see with the realities once, you know, the sort of reality of political and just, you know, as his administration goes on, you know, what can actually get done. But yeah, so for now, I think it's a, you know, pragmatic but sort of big picture list so far.
Right. Ruy, as Thomas mentioned earlier, President Lee Jae Myung, he's also spoken about promoting integration through politics that unite people. Simply speaking, how can politics be promoted to unite people, do you suppose?
Right. This is very related to what Thomas has been saying. Lee Jae Myung's vision of unity, it comes from political stability to fair growth. This is how he wants to achieve that unity. Still, as Thomas said, in terms of his support rate, he's kind of on a honeymoon, still with pretty high numbers, even though decreasing a little bit in the last days. So he wants to take this opportunity to promote this politics in this, what they are calling like the proper inauguration ceremony, which we also celebrate in kind of like a larger scale, much larger scale than the official one, and to put into the table and show the people how or what are going to be the priorities to achieve this unity. After martial law imposed by Yoon Song-yeol, as Thomas also was saying, Lee Jae Myung is aiming to achieve or to restore trust in the institutions. But at the end, what brings or what is more effective at bringing unity is, I believe, or many pundits believe, is economics. And if what he wants to achieve or send this message is that he will have a balanced growth or try to achieve this balanced growth many different ways. One of them is creation of 5 mega hubs that will be in Gangwon, North Jeolla, and Jeju, with special self-governing status. He has talked about promoting infrastructure, innovation clusters, and public institution relocations to make Korea less centralized. One of the points that has been more discussed is that he proposed to shift the national to local tax ratio from 75% national to and 25% local, that is the current one, to, sorry, I said that backwards. So he wants to, yeah, so the current one is 70% national, 30% local, and he wants to reduce it. I'm making all this back, sorry. The current one is 75-25, and he wants to reduce to 70 to 30%. I'm sorry about that. This is interesting proposal, but still, if you compare to other countries like Canada, Germany, or the US, this ratio actually floats around 50-50%. So still Korea, even though with these policies that are trying to be more regional and trying to integrate different sectors of the society, it's still a large gap between this ratio of national and local taxes. Among other things, he is promoting protection to SMEs, anti-theft measures, and expanded class action rights for consumers, among other things.
Right, those are his ambitions as we speak. Meanwhile, Thomas, as Ruy mentioned earlier very briefly, tomorrow, Friday evening, it's the so-called public appointment ceremony for President Lee Jae Myung to officially usher in his term at the top office, that is. Could you tell us a bit about what we can expect tomorrow?
Yes, so this is this big appointment ceremony. I don't think this has been done before in exactly this form. It also coincides with tomorrow is the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Korea. But there will be a big event held in Gwanghwamun Square, and I think there's a few different parts of it, but I think the main thrust of it is that it's going to be 80 citizens, which I guess coincides with 80 years, symbolically appointing President Lee by presenting him certificates, I think with their sort of hopes for what his administration will accomplish. And these are people that I think represent I think in general it's representative of, again, this idea of bringing the power back to the people or sort of sharing power with the people more. And the people that have been announced that are going to be taking part kind of represent this cross section, I guess, of South Korean society. There's the Go or the Baduk champion, Lee Se-dol will be one of them. The football coach, Park Hang-seo, who was the Vietnamese coach of the Vietnamese team. A couple who blocked an armored vehicle during the protests, during the martial law protests. Some rescue workers, a filmmaker, a couple who were the first in South Korea to conceive quintuplets. So it's this kind of very broad-based, cross-section of society. There'll be performances as well. I saw that the group ISNA is performing Golden from the K-pop Demon Hunters film, which I think we were talking about that movie on one of my previous appearances here. So yeah, I think it's this idea again of just underlying, what he has been talking about since he took office, and is also reflected in the policies that he's introduced with this 5-year plan. People not attending. There was kind of a note of who won't be there, and former presidents. Im Yong-bak, Park Geun-hye, I think were invited, but said they weren't going to come. Spouses of some of the former presidents. No Tae-woo and Chun Doo-hwan, their spouses are not going to appear. But yeah, I think it's just, this idea of this public festival underscoring an intention to kind of help blur the line or reduce the distance between the state and the citizens. So that's kind of the underlying feeling behind it, I think.
Right, that appointment ceremony taking place at 8 p.m. at Gwanghwamun Square tomorrow night, that is. Ruy, in light of this occasion, what would you choose to perhaps highlight as some of the achievements on the national front by President Lee Jae Myung as he marks around some 10 weeks at the top office?
Well, I do believe there's a sense of stability in the country compared as when former President Yoon Suk-yeol imposed martial law. I do think a big sector of society is also, I don't want to use the word happy, but at least supports the fact that the former president and the former first lady are getting investigated, prosecuted, and detained. Also, there are some signs of more openness towards, for example, the press, international press. And I do, many pundits believe that through this approach of balanced growth, he will be balanced growth and also the reform of constitution, he will be able, or he at least gonna make a serious effort to decentralize the country and also bring, let's say, as it says, a more balanced distribution of power around the nation.
Right, that is on the national front then. Thomas, what about on the diplomatic front? I know it's really early to say, but what do you suppose have been some of his notable achievements or advancements with regard to foreign policy?
Well, it is early still, as we know. I mean, I think, his approach toward maybe North Korea, or how he intends to try and improve relations with North Korea, has been one of the major storylines so far. And I think, we probably will see him follow up with, trying to follow up on that message tomorrow, perhaps with his, whatever remarks he wants to make during this 80th related to the 80th anniversary of the liberation. Because North Korea also shares this same holiday. So I think, he's obviously made this, improving relations with the North, a key part of his, early days of administration. And, whether it's been successful or not, I mean, he's, not been shy about trying an outreach towards the North. We know last week the South Korean military removed these frontline propaganda speakers, and these efforts to kind of take the temperature down with the North. There was some thought that the North responded by removing as well, but then today Kim Yo-jong made a statement saying that wasn't the case, and she kind of they've been consistently rebuffing efforts. But I think this also kind of ties into this pragmatism and maybe an economic focus on what his administration would hope to achieve, just in terms of taking down the kind of Korea risk factor that has always existed of being right next door to the North. From a business and an economic perspective, I think that's always priced into the valuation of Korean companies and the sense of Korea's economic growth. So if he can kind of lower the temperature with the North, at least in that regard, that's something that plays into his his economic policies. But obviously, I think it's been a long time goal for Lee and other people in his party to sort of, try and still maintain some kind of, hope of, if not unification right now, at least, improving relations. Otherwise, we know he's going to visit Japan as well, and he's got, a trip to the U.S. coming up. So I think we're going to start to see more of where, the foreign policy rubber meets the road. I mean, it's certainly going to be an interesting time to see what happens with the Trump administration, with his summit. Obviously, the tariff deal and the trade deal was another major, step forward in foreign policy that I think, people think relatively in a tough situation, South Korea did okay with that. So, but we'll see what happens next. So, I think that's where we are right now.
Right. And as you both mentioned, Ruy, tomorrow, August 15th, it also marks the 80th anniversary of Korea's liberation from Japanese colonial rule. So tomorrow's ceremony, the appointment ceremony, will be a dual event. What message might President Lee Jae Myung share with regard to neighboring Japan, do you think, on this occasion?
Right. I think this is a very interesting issue that probably before people were focusing more on how President Lee was going to approach North Korea or even United States with the tariff issues and other sectors. But why Japan is interesting? Because, as Thomas was mentioning, right before or just days before the ceremony that's going to happen tomorrow, it was the summit with Ishiba was set with the Prime Minister of Japan, and literally one day after, he's going to travel to US to meet Trump. Why is this interesting? Because it could be a signal that Lee is taking a maybe slightly different approach than other liberal administrations. He has changed his position from when he was a candidate before. He has seemed to moderate more. I mean, candidate when he participated, when he contested against Yoon Sung-yeol for presidency. And he has moderated the speech and saying that the administration has said they will pursue this two-track policy, which means addressing historical disputes with pursuing future-oriented cooperation. So, talking about the speech, we could maybe see different scenarios, but I believe two could happen. One is that he will talk about in this fashion of the two-track policy without getting into much trouble and quite similar to previous liberal administrations. But also, and this is why I say this is an interesting topic, he could send a newer message for a liberal administration because this summit, if we take it as a signal of maybe how to say, like an improved friendship with Japan, or at least with the Japanese leader, maybe he could send us, he could deliver a speech that aims more into that direction, and that could be breakthrough. Still, many pundits believe he will stick to the two-track policy in a much similar fashion. What are the historical disputes, of course, that he could address with Japan is the topics of forced labor compensation, territorial disputes, and wartime sexual slavery, which are the topics that are usually always on the table when we talk about these two countries in the context of Korean independence or Liberation Day. And there's also the factor that I forgot to mention that also could, in a way, push South Korea to have a more practical or more friendly approach with Japan, which is the fact that they are sharing the North Korea threat, but also they are sharing, I wouldn't say a threat, but a pressure from US in the defense sector, because US wants to use these countries too in order to have more strength in the region against the growing power of China, but also the latest tariff policies of Trump administration have, of course, not been a comfortable issue for the two countries. So we could say that even though it's not an automatic decision, it's more the circumstances that could be pushing the Lee administration to have a little bit more openness towards Japan.
Right. And meanwhile, Thomas, as you mentioned earlier, North Korea's Kim Yo-jong, she's denied dismantling loudspeaker broadcast directed towards South Korea, as initially reported by officials here in the country. She's also dismissed, very harshly, prospects of cross-border engagement. All this being said, what message might President Lee Jae Myung direct towards North Korea tomorrow?
Well, I think, you know, I was wondering, I don't know how much he's going to go for this kind of shared history, you know, we're one people type of thing. I mean, I'm sure that would be part of it, but I do wonder, I think already the relationship has changed in a way where that's not quite as maybe strong of a sentiment anymore. You know, even under the Moon Jae-in administration, I feel like that was kind of an underlying message of a lot of the engagement. But clearly, you know, I think he will just keep, you know, reaching out, you know, kind of doubling down on peaceful outreach and perhaps asking, you know, appealing at least for some sort of reciprocity from Pyongyang. I mean, it does seem like he's trying to just take small steps. I mean, I think the idea of a grand gesture at this point seems, you know, a little bit far-fetched, but, you know, maybe just little by little saying, you know, but trying to perhaps, you know, give just, if not an ideological, maybe a practical reason for some of these gestures to just reduce tensions, perhaps at least, you know, possibly in the future working towards, you know, re-engagement of some sort, you know, maybe just on certain shared interest issues from, you know, anything from health to border, you know, geographical kind of those types of issues that have been done in the past. But, you know, so I think perhaps, you know, appealing for reciprocity at least a little bit, or, you know, just saying respond. They keep trying to reach out to Pyongyang to just answer us or something. You know, there have been a number of gestures like that, sort of repatriation. So I think, you know, in those terms, but I can't imagine he will have too sweeping, perhaps, of a you know, outreach to North Korea. Maybe rhetorically he will say, well, it's a good idea, but, you know, maybe just, yeah, these small steps for now.
All right, and we'll find out for sure tomorrow then at the appointment ceremony at Gwanghwamun Square, 8 p.m. in the evening. All right, I'm afraid that's all the time we have today. Thomas, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Ruy, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you so much.
Right, well, that's all for this week. Now, tomorrow marks the start of a long weekend to commemorate Liberation Day, so we will see you next Monday. Thank you for watching.